Welcome to the Evolved Caveman, where men learn to be successful and happy with your host, Dr. John Schinnerer, as he shares the most impactful ideas and practices for you to get the most from your relationships, your work, and from your life. Now here's Dr. John.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is Dr. John Schinnerer with the latest episode of the Evolved Caveman. And I'm super excited today to have with me Dr. Faith Harper, who has written numerous books. And the book that I became enamored with is called Unfuck Your Brain. And Faith is a PhD, LPCS, ACS, ACN, and a badass funny lady with a PhD. She's a licensed professional counselor, board supervisor, certified sexologist, and applied clinical nutritionist with a private practice and consulting business in San Antonio, Texas. She's been an adjunct professor and a TEDx presenter, and proudly identifies as a woman of color and uppity international feminist. She's the author of numerous books, including Unfuck Your Intimacy and Unfuck Your Adulting, and many other popular zines and books on subjects such as anxiety, depression, and grief. Faith, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. You made me sound really fancy just now. Thank you.
Well, I'm impressed with your background. But I've got to tell you that, so I stumbled across your book when I was up in Portland with my daughter, and we were at Powell's Books, which is a massive bookstore. And the top 10, I was looking at the nonfiction books, and yours was one of the top 10 books. It kind of cracked.
It's been the number one. Yeah. It's been the number one at Powell. Thanks. I know. I've been beating out Michelle Obama. She seems oddly not bothered by that. But it's kind of cool. Like, yeah, Powell's has been like a huge supporter of the publishing company I write for and of my book. They get all the credit for that. I think that they're like handing it off or something at this point. It's putting it in people's bags.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about trauma, because that's what really kind of hooked me by this book. So tell me a little bit about what trauma is.
Well, I think of trauma, and we tend to over-explain it. And as a professional in the field, we do enjoy our big words. We paid a lot of money for them. And that was sort of also my frustration, was trying to help people understand it in simpler terms. It's not really that complicated. We've overcomplicated it in terms of explanation. And that was actually the genesis of the book, was the 5 minutes of explaining how, the brain manages trauma that I would give every client. And that's where the book came from. But trauma is anything that overwhelms our ability to cope. It's anything that happened outside of our normal set of expectations. If I get in my car and I'm going to drive to the store, and instead I get in a car accident, that's a traumatic event. And so we experience traumas on the regular, and we don't have a chance to heal from them, to sort of re-engage our capacity to cope, to find, meaning in that experience, and to kind of get back into life. That's what leads to trauma reactions and long-term issues with PTSD, and sometimes depression and anxiety and other things can be triggered by that as well. Trauma is essentially an injury to the nervous system. It's stuck negative energy. And so much of what we do is tied into those past traumatic experiences. You can tell I'm super fun at parties. This is what I talk about all the time. So what do you do?
Sure
Let's talk about trauma.
Walk right up to you and start engaging you in conversation, don't they?
Well, yeah, that, and I'm talking about trauma and talking about sex. So there's either somebody who really wants to talk to me, and there's somebody who's actively avoiding me. Yeah.
Yeah. Depends on the topic. I've had that. I've had similar experiences at parties. Yeah. So what is the difference between those of us who can deal with a certain trauma and those who can't? Do you notice any patterns or?
I think most of the research has been done by the VA at this point, and Center for Deployment Psychology, because we can see the clear path for our returning soldiers and veterans, and can usually pinpoint specific military action type traumas. And it's the past history. It is things that have happened in childhood. It is it's how many. It can be the severity of the trauma. It can be whether or not they're coming fast and serious. When you kind of grow up, maybe, for example, in a family where you are being abused physically on the regular, you don't ever get a chance to process and heal because the traumas keep coming. And also there's a lot of cultural stuff around it of just get over it, man up, deal with it. And that people don't get the time and space that they need to heal. And all of those things can become stuck points for energy. So it's not about some people are weaker than others or don't have the disposition to handle trauma. There's a lot of mitigating factors that can end up making us much more likely to hold on to and not recover from a traumatic event.
Yeah, and so I want to get to that man up comment and talk about men specifically. But prior to that, will you go over that 5-minute intro that you give to your clients about the amygdala and the fight, flight, freeze response?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, this is what it's fascinating to me. And I'm a practicing Buddhist. And so Buddhists have been saying this for about 3,000 years. And brain science is starting to catch up, is that we know that and we know from brain science that certain memories code in different ways. And those big, overwhelming moments, a trauma being something that surpasses our ability to cope, something that's outside of the ordinary, brain goes, okay, bad thing, we're going to keep track of that from now on. And those code as episodic autobiographical memories, EAM memories. They code completely different part of the brain than where you left your car keys. And so anything that is a reminder of that previous situation, the amygdala is going to be like, hey, I need you to pay attention to this. Shit's about to go down. Last time this happened, last time we smelled that smell, last time we were walking down this street, last time somebody yelled at us in this way, we were hurt. And so we have that physical response, our vagus nerve gets activated, the amygdala can't differentiate, it only knows that there are signals around us right now that are reactivating that trauma. PFC goes offline, our prefrontal cortex, our thinking brain goes offline, and we go into, fight, flight, freeze. We go and get ready to be re-traumatized, and we're thinking, what do we need to do to be safe in this situation? And that's the interesting thing. And so for those of us who've had this experience of, hey, and I'm using the word trigger clinically here, I'm being triggered, like I'm smelling a smell that I associate with this trauma, and I'm now reliving my trauma, and that's what a trigger is. Then we're like, okay, I'm weak, I'm not dealing with this well, and it becomes this wrestling of control that we're trying to do with the part of our brain that's job is to keep us alive. And that's, our brain thinks we're being very, very ungrateful. It's really trying to help us, and we're trying to fight with it. And again, we also start to feel like I'm not strong enough, I'm not doing this right, I should be able to control this experience. And when we understand the brain science of what's going on, this is a negotiation. Prefrontal cortex cannot take control back. I love, Bruce Lipton says, it's like once you push play on a tape player, and I don't know, you have to maybe be as old as us to know what a tape player is anymore. And then you don't like what's playing, and you start yelling at the tape player, it doesn't change the tape playing. It's just doing its job and playing the tape. You can't yell at a tape player to make it stop. And we know too from brain science, what Buddhism has been saying is that emotions are only meant to last about 90 seconds. And we found this out from stroke research. So when we're having that strong emotional response, if we can not try to wrestle control from it, I would say it's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. Good luck with that. That we go, oh, and like being curious about the experience and, leaning into the discomfort of it rather than, reacting to it or trying to have a fight with it, and then you go, oh, okay, yeah, this is my shit. This is my shit, but that's not where we are right now. Okay. So I need to,
the mindfulness of allowing whatever's arising to arise without judgment that I love.
Yeah. I say, like, it's curiosity, because we tend to label our emotions. That's a bad one to have. This is a good one to have. And they're all emotions. It's all, it's all physical. We're giving it a label, but it's a physical manifestation of what's going on in our body. We have a physical response. Our gut starts churning. So, we label the emotion of I'm upset, I'm nervous, I'm scared. But that's just our mind trying to make sense of it, rather than going, oh, okay, so super not happy. Is there something I need to pay attention to? Is this old stuff going up? Like really, really curious rather than judgmental. And that's a difficult thing to do, but it's life-changing in terms of being able to cope with traumatic experiences, cope with just everyday life. This is just my shit. And that's okay. And I don't have to react to it in the same ways anymore.
All right. So one of the things that I've been looking at recently is this idea of masculinity and how men are socialized in this man box culture. And, I'll talk to my clients about how, when you're growing up, I can basically eliminate 2/3 of the emotional spectrum for you with two phrases. If you show too much fear or sadness, it's stop being a pussy. And if you show too much excitement, joy, love, romanticism, it's don't be so gay. And those, I think, have a degree of trauma to them for many people. And I don't think, it's not obviously like being in war, but I think it's, as you mentioned, it can be cumulative. Can you speak a little bit to how trauma like that might be influencing men in general and in particular in relationship?
Well, I see it all the time in practice. I'm sure you do too. If, I'm working with, a cisgender heterosexual couple, and the wife is saying, I've never heard this before. I've never seen you cry before. And I'm like, and when has he ever had permission? And there's always this idea that men don't want to do therapy and, men are being drugged, kicking and screaming. And I found that opposite to be true. I find men, desperate to repair their relationships and to figure out what's going on, and not having had any training or permission to have feelings and learn to express them well. And, they're the ones calling me saying, I need to figure this out. And I live in Military City, USA. So I do work with a lot of, and the VA sends me people. I work with a lot of veterans and active duty military and, police and other first responders. And it's interesting. A lot of them have been through some pretty tough stuff in war zones, and they say that was easier. They know how to do that. I have people, I know how to be a warrior. I don't know how to be a husband. I don't know how to be emotionally vulnerable. I don't know what she wants. I don't know how to say what I want. Because they're, like you said, it's, don't do that. Don't be a pussy. Anger is an appropriate emotion. Grief is not. Vulnerability is not. And, my job as a therapist is to give space for that, and then help people figure out ways to bring that space into their relationships, and even to give words to it, and to help them tell me, what is it you're trying to say? Let me help you, figure out how to communicate that. You've probably seen the same thing where they're really struggling to even get to what's in their heart. And I'm like, that's okay. Let's just say, let's try your best and I'll help you with this, and learning a language of emotionality and learning how to communicate and take ownership of your emotions and see what's underlying the anger. Is it hurt? Is it expectations not met? Is it needs not met? And being able to express that. I tell guys all the time, I'm like, you're going to hate me, but you need feminism more than I do. I may only make 77 cents on the dollar, but at least I'm allowed to have a fucking emotional response to my life. And I've had guys just start to weep over that, they're kind of giggling at first, and they're like, you're right. I've never felt comfortable with having an emotional response. And that continued stuffing of our authentic selves causes depression, causes anxiety, causes a trauma response, causes substance addiction, because you're told what you're feeling is wrong. Don't do it. And so we learn to hide it and mask it. What you're seeing, what you're noticing in other people. For those of us who are empaths and kind of grew up in homes where oh, mom and dad are fighting all the time. No, they're not. You didn't see that. You misjudged that. You're told not to trust your intuition about feelings. Yeah. I mean, all that stuff really, we don't realize the impact that has on us. You're told don't trust your own intuition and don't show your emotions. And we see it leaking out in so many areas of our lives.
Yeah, it was interesting. You talk about empaths. So when I was growing up, I still feel things very deeply. And I used to think when I was in middle school that I was the only guy that was made like that. So I completely felt like a fish out of water. Come to find out, after working with thousands of men, I would say 95% of men are exactly the same way. We've just never been given permission to talk about it. And there's no right way or appropriate way for us to learn about it. And so a lot of these men are just desperate to find places to speak about it openly.
And we need to, we need to have those spaces, and we need to reinforce that it is manly to be vulnerable, to lean into the, to say, this society doesn't get to decide how I be a man. I get to decide how I be a man. And it's far more masculine, I think, to kind of disregard the rules and be the kind of man that you want and need to be, because you're going to be happier, your partner's going to be happier, you're going to raise amazing kids because you're going to be modeling a different way of being. That there's nothing pussy about, being a human being with, a wide range of emotions and learning healthy ways to express them outside of just yelling.
Yeah, and I like that approach of looking at a lot of these traits or emotions as human rather than masculine or feminine.
Absolutely.
And then the permission to just feel whatever it is they're feeling: sadness, grief, embarrassment, anxiety. Yeah. So do you have, what sort of tools do you have for people in general, or men specifically, to begin to repair the trauma?
Associated with that, or just trauma in general?
Well, I guess let's go to the prior topic first, and then we can go to trauma in general.
And the big thing is the recognition of going, oh yeah, I've been in this system that I didn't even recognize, like the sort of playing this unwitting role in this system that has these very sticky gender roles that I've ascribed to that have hurt me. And you kind of, when you have that aha awareness moment, that's a big thing. And then I'm like, okay, this is where we're going to start noticing. And that's where, the mindfulness and the curiosity comes in, and, paying attention to it and learning really good coping skills for when this stuff comes bubbling up, whether it be self-compassion type exercises, or I was always trying to get people to, to work out and to eat better and, to do good things for their bodies. The difficult self-care, like, keeping a balanced checkbook and getting your teeth cleaned, all those little things that help the process. And then noticing and being able to, oh, this is what I noticed this week, or, hey, I did really good with this, and then this happened. What's up with that? And then adding in new communication skills, because again, whatever you're feeling is not right or wrong, it just is. And then communicating that with ownership. And I say all the time, if people learn how to communicate with I statements, I wouldn't have a job. If we all learned that in kindergarten.
Well, let me ask you a question right there, in the sense that I find that the I statements and being able to speak to how you feel in an honest and objective way, obviously that's a fantastic skill to have. What do you do with couples where you've got one person who has the ability to do that or is learning the ability to do that, and another one in the couple who maybe judges or even shames in response?
Oh, yeah. Well, and bless his head, my late husband, I would use I statements and he would say, don't feel that way. Like, and my response would be, I just feel that. I'm not even asking you to take responsibility for it. It just is what it is. And he'd say, I hate being married to a therapist, and he'd stomp out the room. We've all had that experience. And that's why it's a really good time to practice that in therapy, is let's practice that and give a chance to respond and saying, okay, so let's go back to that. He's saying I'm angry. He's not saying you made him angry. He's just angry. So what might that, and actually that's where, the refereeship, or even just somebody else going, yeah, that's not what I heard. And I understand why you heard that, but I don't think that that's what he was trying to say. This is what I heard, as the neutral party in the room, and practicing it in session, with somebody who's, comfortable doing that work and, refereeing a little bit can be really, really helpful. And the reminders of it. And I'll give people the I statement sheet, and like, let's hang it on the fridge. It's going to feel weird, but I want you to practice it. And, certain things like, don't use buts. If you're going to give praise, you did X, Y, and Z, but you didn't do the dishes. You just negated all the good stuff that you said. And, and then practicing it in session. So, catching it in session, going, oh yeah, that was a butt word. Let's try that again. And I really hope that, we can find a way that the dishes can get done too before I have to come home and start dinner, whatever it is. And just having to kind of continuously practice using that skill, because we have, especially if we've had years and years and years of, I'm angry. Well, don't be angry. Okay, my bad. Versus, I'm just angry. oh, well, what's going on? Is there anything that I can do to help? Is there stuff underneath the anger that we need to talk about? And having a different and open, concrete is pavement. I would say nobody's going to run across a field of flowers in slow motion to each other. We need to have these conversations. Concrete is pavement. This is my expectation. And you're grown. You can tell me no, or you can tell me yes, but we can have a different conversation if I know what the expectation is.
Mm-hmm. Now, so let me change subjects a little bit. What do you think about the ability to train the mind to stay in the present moment a little bit more, in the sense of learning how to recognize what's going on physiologically so that you can understand when the trauma is coming up for you?
And, it's really difficult. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of work. And, for those of you who are like, I tried that mindfulness shit, fuck off. I get tips. I've been practicing a mindfulness-based meditation for over 10 years, and it's one of the best things I've ever done, and it's still really hard to do. Mm-hmm. And the harder it is to do, actually, the more I get out of it. If I have a very difficult set, or just not even a mindfulness meditation, but just being mindful in the present moment, the more I'm learning about myself. Why am I resistant to this? What's going on? What's coming up? I call it cockroach hunting. I live in the South. Right. We get cockroaches. You flip on the light in the middle of the night, you see a cockroach. You know that there's probably 300 more in the walls. And so anytime we find a cockroach going, oh, I just said that to myself, that means there's 300 more negative thoughts that were running around that you weren't. And so it's about practice and going like, this is really uncomfortable. I really don't like this. This really sucks. I'm supposed to be enlightened and relaxed, and instead I'm miserable. And I can't believe that John and Faith just told me I should be mindful. All of this is really, really hard. That's okay. It should be. I would do the most ridiculous things when I used to make my nose run so I could try and get up off the cushion. My meditation instructor had to keep tissues for me. I don't make my nose run anymore. I would sing I'm Henry VIII I am in my head because that was easier than paying attention to my own. I will still do that sometimes. I'll catch myself singing I'm Henry VIII, just like in Ghost. And so just like, there's me, I'm back on my shit. And, and just having a gentle, compassionate approach with myself. I'm having a really hard time being mindful right now. That's okay. That's part of the process. That's telling me something too.
Yeah, the self-compassion is such a huge piece of it. I mean, I find that when I was younger, my inner critic was very strong and I would yell at myself. Then I got introduced to Kristen Neff's self-compassion work and started speaking to myself with more kindness at times. And more recently, I've started talking to my mind as if it's about 4 years old. Like I'll talk to my mind itself. Like, you wake up at 3 a.m. and your mind starts racing. And now I'm like, hey, shh, I got you. Like, I hear you. Like, it's okay. Like we can talk about this in the morning. So I'm having these conversations in my head with apparently great self-compassion. But it's taken some time to get there, but it still cracks me up.
Yeah. Oh, and it's great practice. And, and I don't like the term inner child, but definitely every age we've ever been is somewhere in our bodies. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I've done the same thing. Or when I carried an on-call crisis phone for years in community mental health, the same conversation I will have in my mind at 3 o'clock in the morning that I'd have with clients. I know that's really upsetting, but that doesn't mean we can't do anything at 3 o'clock in the morning. So let's deal with it when we wake up. Okay. Right. Kind of stuff. And when we can start being aware of that, and anytime we're doing that a little bit more, it helps. And I can see the light bulb moment for people. I have a client that I would tease because the first time he called me, he's like, I need therapy. I'm a piece of shit. That was the message on my machine. Ooh. And I'm like, doubtful. No, he's like, definitely a piece of shit. Definitely a piece of shit. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't think you're a piece of shit, and I will hold space for that until you're ready to believe me.
But we've had those thoughts. We've had those thoughts too. Like I remember one of the stories I'll tell my clients is back when I was, in my, early 30s, I was sitting down to write an article. I was under a deadline. And at this point I had a PhD, I had written a book, and my computer got bogged down because I said yes to updating the Apple iTunes. And the computer just slowed to a crawl, and I'm sitting there doing a slow burn, getting more and more annoyed. And I hear the phrase the thought go through my head, you fucking dumbass. And I had to be like, whoa, like, hold on. Like, where's the evidence for that thought? Like, is that thought true? And to slow it down and actually look at, well, gee, I have a PhD. I got pretty good grades. Some people think I'm smart, but that's the level that you have to get to for some of this stuff, as you know.
Yeah. And it's, yeah. And that was a thing for him and I had him read Kristen's book, and he's like, okay, yep, doing self-compassion thing, still a piece of shit. Yep. Yeah, that's not how it works. Let's keep working at it. So it was a process. And he's like, maybe not a piece of shit. Maybe just normal human being. I'm like, maybe just normal human being. And that's when he was ready to graduate from counseling, like when it finally clicked, that he kept working with it. And, that kind of started to break apart. And I have a sense of humor with myself. I'm like, oh, congratulations, Dr. Faith, still human.
Yeah. Don't you hate that?
Yeah. But having that, I can't believe you did X, Y, Z. And, one of those cockroaches goes scurrying across. I'm like, oh, what? Still human? Not perfect? What about that?
Yeah,
I
those
call
damn
them
emotions.
ASCOs, another fucking growth opportunity. Oh, you had another ASCO moment. Well, there you go.
Yeah, and so I love your metaphor of the cockroaches. I think that's really powerful and useful. And to go back to that idea of present moment, I just find that so many of us spend, I mean, there's some cursory or beginning research on that kind of past, present, future idea, and how we spend more than half our time in the past or the future, and that wandering mind is associated with more misery, which you're probably aware of. And so I think just having the awareness to spend more time in the present moment, to be able to catch it when you are feeling a particular emotion, is immensely important.
Well, and I mean, the default mode of the brain, and I talked about that in the book, that's the storytelling brain. Mm-hmm. And that was one of those things. I've had so many people like, oh, now I understand default mode. When we're not actively engaged with something else, we start storytelling. So past rumination and, future, I mean, it's rehearsal. Our brain is like, okay, well, remember when this happened, so we need to watch for that. And what happens tomorrow, we better rehearse for that. And so we start storytelling, and that's how, so mindfulness it's not a natural state. It's not what the default mode of the brain does. And so we're like, yeah, that's not useful right now. Let's pay attention to what we're doing. Let that be our input rather than rehearsing about something we have zero control over next week.
Okay. So, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, that was
it. Okay. So any other tools that you can offer to male listeners out there to get past the trauma, kind of to become better in relationship?
Well, I spend a lot of time, talking about, what stuff that maybe they saw growing up modeled, what was good, and what are the things that they don't want to continue, and what would, putting aside, all cultural constructs, what would manhood look like? What would they want to model? And show other men? What kind of partner would they want to be? What kind of, parent would they want to be? And spending time with that. And one of the key questions, and this works better with you dudes even than with women, I've noticed, is and I use this a lot when I see somebody about to go do something really stupid. And I'm like, 5 years from now, are you going to say, I made the best decision that I could with the information I had at the time? Or are you going to be really fucking embarrassed by your behavior? And
yeah,
they sit there and you're like, I'm going to be really fucking embarrassed by my behavior right now. I'm like, then don't do the thing. So kind of that future projection of who is it that I want to be looking back on myself now seems to be really helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting. That future projection question is powerful on a couple of levels. I'll teach clients the question of, will this matter in 5 years, in order to gain perspective on a strong emotion in the moment? Mm-hmm. Because if you can keep perspective on it and go, this isn't really that big of a deal, this isn't going to matter in 5 years, then you can kind of come to the realization that maybe that emotion's exaggerating things in the moment.
Right. Or, when people say like, this is an 8, I'm like, okay, so tell me like what your 10 has been in your life. Oh my God, when your mom died. So this is an 8? This is almost as bad as when your mom died? No, it's a 2. There's all those kinds of things where we have to kind of, it's not trying to wrestle control away from our emotional experience, but having a little negotiation with it. When we're a little bit more gentle with ourselves in that process, we can have different breakthroughs, I think.
Okay, now let me switch subjects again. I hadn't planned on going here until I saw, I think you had tweeted something out about a topic that you did, or a talk that you did on kink. Can you go into a little bit of that? Because I wasn't privy to that talk, but I was very intrigued.
I'm going to try and get it online. We streamed it, and if we can't pull the video, I promised my husband that I would re-record it. He's like, that was awesome. It was at a conference. It's Contemporary Relationships Conference, which is put on by Jeff Lutz and in Texas every year, and it's phenomenal. And Jeff is awesome about letting me talk about whatever weird thing I want to talk about. And so it was a 20-minute, like TED style talk. It wasn't a typical conference presentation where you're looking at slides and research. But I said, it was called Lessons from the Margins. Things that we can learn from communities that embrace kink, fetish, BDSM, and polyamory. And it was based on research and evolutionary psychology, because there's presumptions about what we call margin behavior, that, polyamory is margin behavior. It's not. And BDSM is margin behavior, and it's not. But then these are obviously, some of them might be more benign, but they're obviously signs of some kind of, mental illness. So these aren't normal ways of being. And so I'm kind of like doing the math, 20 minutes, I can bust 10 myths. And so that's, what I went in deciding to do, and talking about a lot of the research that demonstrates, first of all, the normalcy of so many of the human ways of expressing sexuality, coming from a lot of evolutionary psychology studies, which is, I would make so much more money if I just said, oh yes, sex addiction exists and you need to pay for 12 sessions up front and we're going to cure you, versus saying, yeah, sex addiction doesn't exist. It's not in the DSM. Let's talk about if you're doing behaviors that are harmful to your relationship. We know that you have far more control over those than, anyone engaging in an actual addiction does. I would be making tons more money if I didn't. Oh, that's normal. You're fine.
So what were some of the myths that you busted?
There was about BDSM in particular. There's a lot of mythology about people reliving abuse. That if you had abusive childhood, you're reliving those experiences. Research shows that people engaged in BDSM communities tend to be mentally healthier than others, less neurotic, more open-minded. Better with, consent and boundaries, because all of those conversations are done out in the open. And the power is not what we think it is. It's the sub that has all the power, for example, in a BDSM relationship, because the dom has to be able to pull back and stop at any time. And so that could actually be a very healing experience for someone who's had a sexual abuse history, to be in the kind of experience. And he's like, we think, well, if they're a sub, they're reliving sexual
trauma. That was the Esther Perel argument that, that she was saying that just because you're a sub doesn't mean that you're submitting to the patriarchal dominant culture, that you're speak to that for a little bit if you could.
Yeah, I mean, because so the person, it's set up, it's contracted, sometimes even on paper. There are safe words. What you want to do and not do is completely up to you. And you can, even in edge play, you can stop at any time in a healthy BDSM relationship. And Roxane Gay wrote about it as well in Hunger, about what a profoundly healing experience it was to be a submissive in a relationship and have the power to say, and she wrote about it, she wrote an essay about Chris Brown as well. I mean, she's talked about this several times. The power to say no and stop. And like DDLG play is very big right now. I didn't talk about that specifically in the top, but DDLG, the daddy dom little girl, which is, specifically gendered, but it can be, any gender dynamic where somebody, it's a sexual play, but one is sort of a dominating parent and the other plays a child. It feels really good to not have adult responsibilities, and it doesn't have to be spankings and BDSM, but a lot of people like the dynamic of watching cartoons and coloring and just being taken care of, and then having that sexual element with it as well. I'm seeing a lot more people being really interested in that dynamic as being adult becomes more and more stressful.
How much of that has to do with giving up control for the sub?
Well, you do have to get into a certain amount of subspace. As the term is to be able to trust somebody enough to take care of you, which is why you have to have those conversations and trust the person that you're with, of like, I'm letting go and trusting someone else to care for me in this process. And that's a relief for people that are doing it. And the person in the dom role enjoys being the caretaker, that it's meeting needs for both people involved. But it does require kind of getting into a specific mental space. You have to be in a subspace and a dom space to achieve those roles, or it doesn't work too well. It's not
Yeah.
just, I want my partner to call me daddy, but if you were, doing like DDLG play, you're going to actually be responsible for their care within that play time period. Friday is DDLG day. You're going to plan the trip to the zoo, and you're going to pack the sandwiches, and you're going to care for this person. And so you have to be in a space to do that.
So how was the talk received?
Oh, it was people loved it. I love throwing out research, and people were like, wait, what? I never learned that in graduate school. And I'm like, yeah, that's why I'm not teaching anymore. I get in trouble because that's the stuff that comes out of my mouth.
Yeah, I love the anti-intuitive research.
Yeah.
The research where you go, what?
What? There's so much more research coming out now. Esther Perel's been one, Wednesday Martin, of people talking about the presumption of female monogamy, and everything in evolutionary psychology says that's clearly not true, that, women typically have probably been the bigger hoes than men across species and even within human history. And we're seeing more and more research. And so I, love, talking about all that and myth busting, and this idea that if somebody has a kink or a fetish, a BDSM fetish or otherwise, or any kind of specific kink, that, it's indicative of some trauma, and talking about the evolutionary psychology of how these things come to be. And they're not typically trauma informed. Women just tend to be more sexually fluid and sexually open in general. There's something going on with testosterone. What men are into tends to code pretty young. We think that people aren't sexual until they're teenagers, but that's not true. When a lot of times we notice certain fetishes coded from very innocent things that happened at age 4 or 5, and that's what created the attraction that it created. And there's also been, evolutionary reasons where it made sense. A lot of times spikes in foot fetishes corresponded with spikes in like gonorrhea and syphilis and those kinds of things, because it was safer. So, syphilitic sores can't hide in toes the way they can in vaginas and anuses. So it was safer. If you were interested in feet, you were much more likely to survive to pass on your genes if feet did it for you, in times of syphilis. So you were much more likely then to also pass that kink on. And so there's, evolutionary reasons why we do what we do. There's evolutionary reasons for just about everything we've discovered, except I don't think they figured out female ejaculation yet. But a lot of times you can see why we are the way we are. We have these ideas of normal. We have these cultural ideas that, women are monogamous because, this is what we do. We're the ones that stay home and take care of the hearth. And everything in evolution has said otherwise for so long. And once you start kind of peeling that back and looking at that, it's the individuals who sort of embrace their kink or embrace consensual non-monogamy that are saying, yeah, I don't ascribe to these norms. I don't think these norms are, because they're not. There is no norm. There's 7.5 billion people in the world, and there's 7.5 billion different experiences of what it means to be a sexual human. And that doesn't equate one norm. And we need to stop pretending that it does. And so people that have been in, quote unquote, marginalized communities are saying, yeah, that's not me. I'm going to embrace who I am and do so in healthy and ethical ways, which is what, one of the biggest books that's been out the longest on consensual non-monogamy is called The Ethical Slut. There are ethical ways of being who you are.
To bring it back full circle, it's sort of like, part of my work is trying to get rid of the idea that there's one ideal way to be masculine, that there's, instead of that, there's thousands of ways to be masculine. And it sounds like what you're saying is there's thousands of ways to be appropriately sexual. And isn't that kind of bringing it back to the self-compassion work?
Right. Figuring out, and we know too, even for things that are really not okay to do, for people that are truly wired for pedophilia, you're not going to change that. So we need to find ways for them to be healthy and not harm. In fact, pedophiles are not the ones that are arrested. It tends to be which is Jesse Barron's writing on the subject is fantastic. As an evolutionary psychologist, he's looked quite a bit of that. Is how do we find ways for people to be healthily who they are, and if that doesn't match up with the relationship that they're in, finding the negotiations. I've worked with people that one person is polyamorous and one is monogamous, and like I don't want to break up with this person. just so I can be polyamorous. I choose this person. So finding ways that they can kind of scratch that polyamorous itch without actually having other secondary partners. They go to clubs together, or, whatever
Right.
works. Or, my partner doesn't mind if I watch foot fetish pornography before we have any kind of partner intercourse, or, there's so many creative ways to, and, typically, we have all these conversations about sex addiction and porn addiction. There is no DSM diagnosis for that. It doesn't exist. You can definitely have problematic behaviors around that, but you can't, and that was one of the other things that I talked about. What we continue to call too much sex are just random numbers. And it's typically, it seems to be over and over and over again that 13 times a week is just too much. So 12 is okay and 13 is too much. And it tend to be tied to the researcher's own experience. So the researcher was having, ejaculating 12 times a week. So 13 was clearly too much. Kinsey back in 48 did a study around it. He's like, this is what's considered too much. How many people are deviant according to the standard? And 75% of men were deviant according to the standard. There is no, everyone's different. There is no standard. The brain is supposed to light up during sex. So you can't even measure it in terms of is the brain lighting up in the engagement of this action, which is, how we measure other process addictions. If I buy shoes because I need shoes, it's not going to light up in the same way as if I have some kind of shopping addiction. And the brain always lights up during sex, it's supposed to, so we can't measure it that way. So we have to treat it like it can be a problematic behavior, it can be a relational problem, but it's not an addiction. We have far more control over it than we think we do. David Lay's done a lot of wonderful work in this regard. And he continues to get drugged by the internet for it, but he's right.
Yeah. Well, you brought up pedophilia earlier. What other hard boundaries are there in this area where things are off limits?
Well, we talk about there's, pedophilia and bestiality, necrophilia. There is stuff that people are interested in sexually for one reason or the other, which is people that truly are. It's pretty rare. And so how do we find ways to, it's not something we're going to change typically. So how is that engaged in ways that they can, be safe without having to be, castrated? And I say castrated because typically as men, because there is that testosterone connection of kinks and fetishes being tied into early experiences. And everybody's wired a little bit differently. And so if there's things that are harmful to others, if it can't be, if you can do age play with a consenting adult who likes age play and that scratches that itch for you, awesome. And Jesse Barron talks about yes, child pornography is obviously a problem because children are still being hurt in the process of making this pornography, and sex trafficking is real. But what if it was computer generated type stuff? And one of the examples he gives was in Poland from 1948 to 1989, and someone will probably correct me if I got it wrong, all pornography was illegal. Couldn't get anything. Everything was illegal. When everything became legalized in 89, the instances of crimes against women and children, sexual crimes, decreased dramatically. So we know that porn can actually be very, very helpful. So if porn could be provided in a way that people weren't hurt in the process of the creation of the porn, ethical porn for adults, computer generated porn, if we know that people aren't going to harm others by having that outlet, why wouldn't we do that? I have a friend who says, there should be sex dolls in every prison. And I'm like, right? And he's done federal time. He can tell you there really probably should be sex dolls in every prison cell. I get more and more radical and cranky the older I get. It's let's just. I think my editor we had a conversation by text, and I think he was trying to see what my response was. But he was talking about necrophilia specifically, and he's like, "What would you do for that?" And I'm like, well, they have to figure out what part they were into. Did they like the cold body? I'd get them a sex doll and, soak it in the tub in ice water, then let them have sex with it. And he's like, well, they like digging up the body. I don't remember where it came from. I'm like, well, get him a sex doll and bury it in the backyard and put garbage on it. Then he can dig it up. And you're like, whatever we need to do to keep you from harming others, because what you're interested in is not going to change. You're going to get a lot of angry emails about this show, aren't you?
I imagine, yeah. But it's still a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, and I mean, Jesse Barron's written two wonderful books, Why Is It Shaped Like That and Perv, which both go into a lot of this and are very heavily researched, and evolutionary psychology is his thing. And so, thinking practically, like if we can't, and I've had people who have, been engaging in stuff that wasn't great, and we could kind of figure out that this is where it was coming from, and it was like this reactive strategy to stuff. And there are times that you can unpack that therapeutically, but that seems to be more rare than not. He's showing over and over. There's some people that are just wired for stuff, and if that's what they're wired for, it's not something that we can fix with hypnosis. And we need to find ways to have, let people be who they are so they're not hurting others in the process.
Yeah, so the main criteria for you seems to be getting the outlet met or the need met without harming others with consent if necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because you definitely, no children, no pets, no dead body. Mm-hmm. There's things that are obviously not okay. But if that's the only thing, and we're talking about experiments where they've actually tested blood flow and shown images to see what people are truly interested in. We're talking about people that are not using children because they're not getting sex from a partner. And so, offenders is different, right? I'm not talking about offender behavior being a different thing, but people who are truly only sexually aroused by, younger than adolescent children, and that's always who they've been, and that's not going to change. And they're not. How do you deal with that? Because you're not gonna. At least we haven't found a way yet that we're going to grow them up to be interested in adults. So how do we make sure that they don't become offenders because of their sexual interests?
Yeah, and I think these are difficult conversations to have, but I think they're conversations that need to be had.
You're right. And I don't have any magical answers, but I think we need to be a little bit more practical than we have been, because there's always this idea. My office partner is a sex offender treatment provider, and she works with, and she contracts with the court system. She works with a lot of offenders. And I mean, even within that system, there's a wide variety of behaviors that cause the offense, and not everything is something that's going to be treatable in therapy. Sometimes people are how they are. Mm-hmm. And we need to be a little bit more honest about, what our limitations are, and then what does that mean? So how do we, human on the planet and protect, because if we really want to, like what Poland did, if we want to stop people from hurting each other, we need to give them appropriate outlets.
Well put. So in wrapping this up, are there any questions that I should have asked you but didn't? Any places that you wanted to go?
Well, you didn't ask me about my sexy optic nerve. I don't know if you saw on Twitter. Apparently my optic nerve is banging.
Tell me about your sexy optic nerve.
Oh, no, it was one of those middle-aged funny things. I had to go, see the optometrist. Time for reading glasses, welcome to middle age. And, he pulls out and he's like, wow, your optic nerve is amazing. It's so healthy. And I'm like, usually people say I have pretty eyes, but thank you.
So everyone has their own thing.
Yeah. Well, and I'm like, hey, I'm a nutritionist. No sugar, sexy optic nerve. That's how it works.
Ah, very nice. Well, Faith, thank you so much for the time and the conversation. I greatly enjoyed it. I think these are really powerful topics to have conversations around. I think it's much needed.
Yeah, and I'm sure that we'll probably both get some hate mail, but that's okay. I did instead of him for once. He usually gets most of the heat about.
Let me just share with the listeners where you can contact or get more information about Faith Harper. Her author speaker page is theintimacydoctor.com, and doctor is DR. Her private practice page is faithgharper.com, and her social media pages are at The Intimacy Doctor, where doctor is spelled DR. So Faith, thank you so much again. I really appreciate your time. Greatly enjoyed the conversation.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me, geek out about, hey, I said trauma and sex. That's what I talk about at parties all the time. So we got to talk about both today. That's awesome.
And I really enjoyed it. So thank you again so much. And hopefully we can do it again down the road.
I'd love to.
All right. Thanks, Faith. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Evolved Caveman podcast. If you like what you've heard, support us by subscribing, leaving reviews, and sharing the podcast with friends and colleagues. For the latest, most powerful tools to connect with like-minded men, join the Facebook group at The Evolved Caveman. Follow Dr. John on Instagram at The Evolved Caveman, all one word, or join the email list by visiting guidetoself.com.